How does a Broadway musical come into being? For that matter, how does it come to be written in the first place? It's certainly more complicated, say, than writing a poem, if only to the extent that it must involve the talents of a great many people. And then it must be tested against the cruel realities of the staggering cost of bringing a Broadway musical onto Broadway. Currently at the 46th Street Theater here in New York is a new musical, Do I Hear a Waltz? It derives from The Time of the Cuckoo by Arthur Laurents, which was a play that had a very successful Broadway life of its own some 12 years ago, and then became a film under the title of Summertime. With us today on Camera 3 to discuss Do I Hear a Waltz, and in general the whole mystique of getting a dramatic idea onto Broadway in musical form, is Arthur Laurents, who wrote the book, Stephen Sondheim, who wrote the lyrics, and Beni Montresor, who designed the scenery and costumes for Do I Hear a Waltz. Before we start exploring, I should mention that Do I Hear a Waltz is obviously most fortunate in its parentage. Mr. Laurents is the playwright who has given us Home of the Brave, A Clearing in the Woods, among others, plus the book for West Side Story and Gypsy, so he's not new to musicals either. Mr. Sondheim wrote the lyrics for West Side Story and Gypsy, and both lyrics and music for A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, as well as numerous works for television. Mr. Montresor has designed sets for the Spoleto Festival in Italy, for the Glyndebourne Opera Festival in England, and the New York City Ballet, and for Giancarlo Menotti's Last Savage here in New York. And just recently, Mr. Montresor has added another laurel to his career by winning the cherished Caldecott Medal for the Best Illustrated Children's Book of 1964. And the composer who worked with these three gentlemen was Mr. Richard Rodgers. So what more could any musical ask for? Well, first things first, Mr. Laurents, what's the number one problem among the many that a playwright faces when he undertakes to convert his own work into a musical?
Ego.
His own?
No, everybody's. I think that's one of the problems with doing a musical. It's collaboration. And you mentioned before staggering costs. I think the most expensive is the nervous energy of everybody involved. I think doing a musical is a kind of hell. And you just hope it'll be worthwhile at the end.
Well, what is the, The Time of the Cuckoo, of course, had already undergone one change in an art form. And how long is it since the idea of putting it into musical form started to take shape?
Well, I've wanted to do it as a musical for a long time. The first time I spoke to anyone, I think, was right after Gypsy, and I spoke to Rodgers and Hammerstein, and they felt it was too early. And then Mr. Hammerstein died, and then, by great perseverance, I managed to convince Mr. Sondheim and Mr. Rodgers to do the musical with me. That was the hardest part of it all.
Now, going back to you personally, in a sense, you had to perform surgery on yourself. Would that be a fair way of putting it?
It's too dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, so many years have gone by since I wrote the play that I don't care that desperately. Also, after I've finished writing something, it doesn't mean very much. And I've always had a tendency to cut too quickly.
Well, now, do you feel that, in a sense, you were creating something that has a life and being of its own because of the needs of the musical form?
Yes. Oh, well, anything has to be changed if it's done as a musical, but this one is basically a musical of character, and that character, Leona Samish, has an independent life of her own, independent of me at this point.
And she's had
3 lives.
She's had 3 lives, exactly.
And I hope this one goes on for quite a while.
Well, I think everybody does.
Yeah.
Well, now, at what point, the decision having been arrived that Mr. Sondheim and Mr. Rodgers were going to work with you, were the decisions reached which permitted them to go ahead and start working.
I don't know quite what you mean.
Well, what I mean is this, yeah, obviously, there must be agreement between the writer of the book, it seems to me, and the composer and lyricist that there will be natural places.
Oh, well, most of
that
kind of collaboration was done by Mr. Sondheim and me. We've done several musicals before. We work very closely, and I think marvelously together. He's be easier to compliment him if he weren't sitting here. But he really is marvelous to work with, and the way we work, I do a rough outline with places where I think there should be songs, and then we discuss them, what the song should be, and then he takes over. And in this case, and then he, after we had worked all this out, we elaborated on it with Dick Rogers, and then they went to work. That's pretty much the way it was.
Yes. Well, now, at what point do you begin to look around for the talents that Mr. Montresor has brought to A Hero Waltz?
Early.
Quite early.
Yeah, in this case, yes. Because the whole scenic department in the New York Theater is pretty bad. We have very few good designers, and this show, taking place entirely in Venice, needed somebody really special.
Well, you got somebody really special, didn't you?
Yes, we did indeed.
Definitely a man who had been at Venice. Isn't that a fair statement?
Was born in Venice, almost. I was born in Verona, but then I grown up in Venice.
And you left.
And left.
To conquer the new world.
Because it's much better to keep Venice in your memory than to live there. But that is a special place.
Oh, it's easier to do anything about Venice when you're not there. I was there exactly 4 days, and then I wrote the play.
You're right. But to me, it was a kind of la recherche at the temps perdu. Everything came from memory. I did a very little research. And then I thought they had to be... I was doing scenery for a musical. So I used my experience for opera, and I tried to express Venice and music at the same time. For this reason, everything is painted, it's light, and you have the feeling more the air of Venice, the golden air of Venice, more than the real things.
I'd like to come back to a point that you made, Mr. Laurents, and that is that, in a sense, this particular musical is created around a character. In other words, it's not just color and music and lights and costumes. You begin with your character, whom you had in the Time of the Cuckoo. Well, what kind of a character is Leona?
Leona's a very American person. She's a person who is emotionally rather frozen, finds it very difficult to release herself and really fall in love, and considers material things a proof of affection, which I think is, unfortunately, rather American.
I think that's true. Do you go along with this concept of the character, Mr. Sondheim?
Oh, certainly. One of the problems that we faced when we were planning it was the age of Leona. It had been cast originally with Shirley Booth and Katharine Hepburn, both of whom, by virtue of their age and quality, made the emphasis on the story slightly that of a lady having her last chance at a romantic adventure. And we made the decision to cast this one younger, and we have indeed a very attractive girl playing the part, which makes the problem a much subtler one, which is you wonder now, what is wrong with this girl? Why is she alone? When she comes to Venice and she's so attractive and all that, how can she possibly have any problems?
Well, that would stir the chivalrous instinct of every male in every audience, don't you think?
I think it very well might. But I think it helps point up the fact that we're not dealing with a problem of age at all, but a problem of what Arthur calls the frozen emotions, which can happen at any age, and which indeed is the core of the play.
There's also a misconception. People think that if you're good-looking and or rich, you have no problems. And unfortunately, it's far from being the truth.
completely wrong, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Now, does the nature of the leading character and her background, the conception of her as Mr. Sondheim has just expressed it, have importance for you as you approach the designing that's called for by the musical?
Well, I think so. I had to bring on the stage something different from what the lady is. This is the point of the play. She goes in another place. She found herself involved with different, different. So I had to show and to visualize something never seen before by her.
So I think what Beni tried to do and achieve very successfully is the whole piece is really seen through Leona's eyes. So what he did is a very romantic version of Venice. It really is beautiful looking, and then, which fits because there's one point when she says that when she falls in love she'll hear a waltz. Well, she finally does, and in the song she sees the whole city waltzing, which is also a romantic concept, along with the scenery and everything else in the show.
So that while Venice in reality exists and is wonderful, this Venice is a state of mind.
Highly stylized.
Yes, absolutely.
I can say even a film of memory, something seen through your memory. For this reason, I thought from the beginning to have one set dissolving into another, like a
Film.
Like a film. And instead to have to close with a curtain, then people behind are preparing another set, and then the curtain goes up, you see. Instead, all the set dissolve into another one in front of the audience. This is very theatrical, but I think is right for this story, because
Oh, it's perfect, yeah.
The critics, in writing Do I Hear a Waltz, have been in agreement in complimenting you gentlemen on your integrity of purpose, how you have resisted many, many temptations that must have come your way in doing a musical about an American girl in Venice. But you have stayed firmly with the idea which was yours when you wrote Time of the Cuckoo.
Oh, the critics are even wrong when they flatter you. There were no temptations. Nobody was tempted to whoop it up and have a lot of peasants jigging around the piazza. It was just wrong. And we really didn't have to fight to hold on to the picture we had at all.
No, it's an intimate musical. It was conceived as such, and there was never any question. I mean, we never even had any large discussions except whether we wanted any dancing at all or not. And we have a small amount of dancing in the show in two places where it seems called for, and nowhere else. Nor is there any large ensemble singing, except at one point where you hear sort of the noises of people strolling in the Piazza San Marco at night. But it's all small ensemble sounds. The largest number is for 5 voices.
6.
Oh, the party song? All right, yes.
Well, to what extent did you have to create new characters and new situations in making allowance for them for the musical form?
There are no new characters, and the new situation is simply because in a musical you have more fluidity and you have more scenes. You could show more than you did in the original play. But
Also, you changed the concept of at least 2 and maybe 4 of the people.
yes, I changed. Yeah, but I didn't add or subtract. I changed some of the characters. I think they're better than they were in the original. The middle-aged tourist couple is not as corny, I hope, and the young couple are better than they were in the original. Also, in the original, I think I gave the Italians, forgive me, Beni, I think I gave them too much the best of it, and here the Americans also have their say.
Well, I am reminded, I don't know if I should mention any other musical, even one that's 30 years old, when I think of Do I Hear a Waltz, of a very enchanting musical of many years ago called The Cat and the Fiddle. I guess I date myself, but it was a musical that earned the adjectives that the critics have been kind enough to bestow upon Do I Hear a Waltz, which was, and what made me think of it, Mr. Sondheim, was you were saying this is an intimate musical rather than a loud, brassy one.
It's intimate, incidentally, not just because of the, let's say, lack of noise, because you can have a fairly noisy show and still be intimate. It's intimate in scope. That is, it concentrates, it focuses on the relationships between a small number of characters. And, for example, I always consider Gypsy an intimate musical. It's a musical about 3 people. I consider My Fair Lady an intimate musical. It's a musical about 2 people, as opposed to a musical about a whole town or about a whole large group. That's all. It's that the focus is small. We actually have quite a large cast. We use the other people only almost as set dressing in the sense that they represent the life that's going on that affects the main characters indirectly. But it's intimate that way.
To what extent did you use The Time of the Cuckoo as a point of reference or departure in the preparation of Do I Hear a Waltz?
Well, you know, you start with it and then try to cut it to the strongest emotional moments and cut out. In a play, there's much more palaver and there's much more leading up to things. In a musical, you have to get to it and run from it as quickly as possible. It's a shorthand form of writing, basically, musicals.
Well, of course, the job of the set designer in creating the original The Time of the Cuckoo is quite different from the challenge to Mr. Montresor in this one.
Yeah, the original had one thing, the backdrop, which was meant to look like a reflection, I always thought looked drunk. And I must say, nobody in the audience knew what the devil was going on.
Yeah, we have that here, don't we? Isn't this from the original, from the
Yes,
The Time of the Cuckoo?
Still looks drunk.
Yeah, well, it looked even drunker because through those windows, the designer originally had kind of chandeliers and tables, and everything was careening around, and you thought there was some mad, wild party going on up there.
And now here your Leona was Shirley Booth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this then became Summertime, 1955, was it?
It half became Summertime.
Now, was this was the set for...
That's their version of the garden. I say half became. They did only the first act of the play. Miss Hepburn, after they finished it, she invited me to tea, and she said, I don't know whether you like it because there are several changes, including the last scene where the man tells off the woman. She said, I wouldn't let any man tell me off. She said, I wouldn't give you 10 men for any one woman. And she was never told off in the picture, that is.
And now coming to its current version, its third version, Mr. Montresor, in beginning to create what the audience sees, because here is the additional excitement for the audience, I think, in going to a musical. They're interested in how it sounds and what the story is, but they're also interested and excited about what they're going to see. You begin with a rendering, is that the correct technical word?
Yes. Rough sketches.
And
Sketches.
Rough.
Unfortunately...
Beautiful.
Impressionistic. Unfortunately, we cannot show the colors here because I think the colors are very important. First, the most important thing. Do you think so?
I think it's all. I think it's some of the most beautiful scenery there's ever been on Broadway.
And Beni's sketches are small works of art in themselves. I've never seen sketches for sets that are as much delight in and of themselves.
well, now, in starting those, you started from your feeling about the play?
I read the script, and at that moment I didn't know if I was going to do it, because it was my first Broadway show, and they said he never worked on Broadway. And so I read, and I want to do it so much because just reading the script, everything was there. I said I want to do, and so I was in my place waiting for 1 month to hear from the people if they want.
Well, what would you say are the basic things that you were working toward when you started these sketches that you have here?
Yes. This is the curtain show, the opening of the musical. All the sceneries are painted on screen, and so by changing or lighting, one scene disappears and another one comes in. This is the curtain show. After this, we see, by transparency, Leona arrive in Venice. This is the view of the Grand Canal, who dissolve into, in front of the audience, all this happened, dissolve into Piazza San Marco. Yes. And then after this, street of Venice.
Now, this is the Venice that every American feels he knows, whether he has been there or not.
And then at this moment, we start to meet Venetian people, too. They come, the big ensemble number. And this is the garden, Pensione, where the real story started. This is the inside the Pensione with red wallpaper. And this, even this one, at a certain moment, becomes transparent, you see outside. This is the shop of a Venetian man. This one is the Pensione outside, it's the opening of the second act. This is another view of the Pensione outside.
Now, as you said yourself, well, these are lovely, and I think we sense even from the screen the gossamer quality that you have created here. I wish camera 3 were in color today, so that the colors that Mr. Montresor puts into the color. Now, this set that we have just seen of sketches heightens what you said about the things that you can do in a musical, which you didn't do because of the restrictions of the stage itself when you wrote the original play.
Oh, yeah, particularly with the whole scenic scheme that Beni has. It's terribly simple to go from one place to another. And it really is extraordinary to see on the stage what amounts to a dissolve, such as we have in movies. It's breathtaking when it goes from that canal to the piazza. It looks like some trick, and you're not quite sure how it happened. It really is marvelous.
It happened just by a change of lighting. So.
Well, now, we've been talking about the book, of how the play became a book, and how Mr. Laurents survived what he's had to do to his play. And we've spoken of the approach to the lyrics and music of Mr. Sondheim and Mr. Rogers, and now we see the setting. Now, how about the talents of the players? Leona is in her third incarnation. You have had a feeling for all three of these because she's your creation, Mr. Laurents. How about Elizabeth Allen as compared or contrasted with Shirley Booth and Katharine Hepburn?
All three are different. And Liz, of course, something I think is extraordinary about her performance, that she, first of all, she really sings. The whole company sings extraordinarily well, which is very rare, as you know, in a musical these days. She's extraordinarily skillful as an actress, particularly for somebody as young as she is, and as relatively inexperienced. I mean, she has had experience, but not anything comparable to what Shirley or Kate did at the time they played it. The man, Sergio Franchi, who has a marvelous singing voice, but had very little acting, and I think he's terribly good. As a matter of fact, I really think that it is about the best acting company that's ever been in a musical.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They really are marvelous. And what's extraordinary is that they can all sing.
And sing really well. I mean, not just...
Not just croak out a tune.
Now, I understand that the audience gets a terrific bang out of the joy and the fun and the humor of the lyrics. So if Mr. Sondheim will hide his face, would you comment to us about the lyrics? Because they're really something, are they not?
Oh, they're really marvelous, and he thinks the audience doesn't listen to lyrics. But it's really extraordinary, the laughs, for one thing. I've never heard an audience laugh as much and as loud and as long as they do at his lyrics in this show.
Audiences don't listen to lyrics, incidentally, very much.
I think they do, because they love
Because they have so much to take in. You have to take in music and lyrics
You
and
mean
a
if they don't
situation
hear
and
your
a voice.
lyrics, you have to blame it on Mr. Montresor and Mr. Rogers?
No, I don't
I
blame
think
it on
we'd argue
anybody.
with you.
I
Seriously.
think they don't listen 9 times out of 10 for the right reason. The song starts and it says, when you took my hand, and they say, yes, you took my hand, we fell in love, all right, let's get through this song. But Steve's lyrics always have a development of what has been said in the scene. They always carry it further. They're always written in the diction of the character. I mean, not only funny, I think it's easier to be clever than it is to carry a character further. And I think he's the only one who can do it today.
Well, gentlemen, I hope we're going to have the pleasure of inviting you back to Camera 3 on the first anniversary of Do I Hear a Waltz? It opened recently at the 46th Street Theater and has been delighting audiences since its opening and promises to go on delighting audiences for a long time to come. And our thanks to Arthur Laurents, who wrote the book for Do I Hear a Waltz, to Stephen Sondheim, who is responsible for the lyrics, who Mr. Taubman in the Times referred to as the lines are witty, and with a compliment to Mr. Richard Rogers, the tune bounces. And to Mr. Beni Montresor, who designed the sets that another distinguished critic called imaginative, atmospheric, and handsome. To these gentlemen, our thanks for joining us today on Camera 3.